Many people do foolish things when they're young, which is unavoidable, but we learn from our mistakes. Some mistakes go too far and destroy families and destinies. This is what happened to the protagonists of today's story, whose reckless actions led to a bloody tragedy. The crimes were committed with shocking brutality. The life of Anne Kasprzak was difficult from the start. She was born on January 10, 1997, but not into a loving family. Her parents were outcasts and suffered from severe addiction problems and mental illnesses, which made her environment unstable from the beginning. The girl grew up in a frankly hostile atmosphere and was taken away from her parents at an early age and placed in the care of a new family. But each time something went wrong, and her adoptive parents got rid of the child just like her biological parents did. Thus, by the age of 9, the child had been in 9 different families. Naturally, the girl felt unwanted and alone in the world. She could no longer rely on adults, and living in an orphanage discouraged her from trusting people in general. Nevertheless, the heroine of the story wanted to find a loving family that would not reject her like everyone else, but would accept her as their own. Ani simply dreamed of a father and a mother who would care for her and give her love. After being returned by the 9th family, she found herself in an orphanage, and during this time met Veronica Kasprzak. Veronica was a social worker in the state of Utah who worked to find suitable families for children who had been dealt a bad hand in life and could not find their place. Veronica was known as a very caring family and child welfare worker who treated everyone she helped with genuine love. The woman immediately noticed Ani and was touched by her story. The girl told her how she had been physically abused when she could barely stand. She lived in a dysfunctional and abusive family that left deep scars. Veronica cried as she listened to the child's story. She saw how unfair life had been for this little girl and the tragedy it entailed. Veronica and Annie developed a rather close and warm relationship. The social worker began to visit and support the girl. In January 2007, Veronica was 6 months pregnant. During this time, she told her husband a lot about the girl's story. Her husband, Dennis Kasprzak, also wanted children as much as his wife did. Eventually, they decided to adopt the heroine of the story and bring her into their family. Veronica and Dennis were decent, kind people and were able to carry out their plan without problems. So Annie moved to the Kasprzak family in a suburb of Salt Lake City, Utah. A few months later, Veronica gave birth to twin boys. By this time, all the bureaucratic hurdles of adoption had been overcome, and the little girl was welcomed into her new family. Although this was her 10th attempt to establish a family, Annie was delighted and truly hoped that life's problems were finally behind her. She believed she would now experience the love of a mother and father. Unfortunately, fate had a new challenge in store for her. Annie now had a home, wonderful parents, and even 2 younger brothers. She enjoyed looking after them and helping her foster mother. The little ones did not give the girl much free time. Annie got along well with them, felt like a caring big sister, and willingly took on this role. She tried to show them the world and teach them something new every day. The heroine of the story loved her new siblings dearly, and they reciprocated her love. Sometime after moving to her new family, the girl's first trip to the beach took place. It was a family vacation before Christmas. Veronica and Dennis organized a great holiday for their children. They spent most of the time unpacking gifts. But even during this time, there were disagreements in the family. Both were sure that the arrival of the children would strengthen their relationship and reveal new facets of their lives, but unfortunately, this was not the case. After a while, the couple divorced due to domestic disputes. This was a difficult time for Veronica and Annie, who had already experienced similar situations. She realized that this turn of events could once again deprive her of her family. Despite the divorce, Dennis maintained a warm relationship with his ex-wife and continued to participate in raising the children, including his adoptive daughter. Fortunately, the child's fear of returning to the orphanage was unfounded. At the same time, Veronica began to build a new relationship and remarried. Her new husband, James, proved to be as loving and caring as her previous one. He loved Annie right away and treated her like his own daughter. Despite the divorce, it seemed that the adoptive family only benefited from these changes. The heroine of the story gradually regained her trust in people and understood what parental warmth and love were. The couple moved with their children to a quiet small town in Utah called Riverton. It was a great place to shape their destiny. But this story did not have a happy ending. James often admitted that his adopted daughter had a kind of gift and could talk her way into anything because she regularly begged for gifts. However, the girl never crossed the boundaries of normal behavior. Once, she saw red shoes in the store that she liked so much that she begged her foster father to buy them, which he did not refuse. During this period, the 15-year-old Annie was in her first year of college. The heroine of the story was a good student and well-liked by all her teachers. She dreamed of becoming a pediatrician because of everything she had experienced in her childhood. The young Annie wanted to help other children. Veronica was the light at the end of the tunnel that gave her a new life. The adopted daughter dreamed of being like her mother and dedicating her life to helping others. She even wished for a caring mother like Veronica to adopt more children so Annie could teach and help them at home. Of course, these were childish fantasies, but they fully reflected the girl's kindness and the light she radiated in her short life. Annie was kind and cheerful. Veronica always saw her as someone who could achieve a lot. Annie was curious and interested in everything around her. She treated everything that happened with great love and wanted to absorb everything around her. Similarly, the student experienced her first love. These feelings flared up unexpectedly, and she gave herself to them completely. On the evening of March 10th, 2012, Annie stayed home to look after her younger brothers, while Veronica and James went out for a long-awaited romantic dinner they had planned for a long time. When the couple returned home, everything seemed normal. The only thing her mother noticed was that the girl had changed out of the shorts she always wore at home and was now wearing jeans. Veronica attributed this to the low temperature in the house and paid it no mind. She had a severe headache that she couldn't shake, so she took a shower while her adopted daughter went to her room to listen to music. When Veronica came out, she decided to check on Annie in her room, but she was not there. She couldn't find her anywhere in the house. The worried parents began looking for clues as to where the girl might have gone. James thoroughly searched her room and found a note under her pillow. In it, Annie wrote that she could no longer stay there and had decided to run away to California with her boyfriend. The student admitted she was pregnant and asked them to let her go, not to look for her, and not to report her missing to the police. This shocked the Kasprzak family, who couldn't believe something like this was actually happening to them, so they continued their investigation. As it turns out from the pages of her diary, the heroine of the story became sexually active a few months before these events. The closer the date of the escape approached, the more she felt that something was happening to her. She suffered from weakness, nausea, and dizziness. The schoolgirl regularly got sick for no apparent reason. Finally, Annie concluded that she was pregnant. She took a test, but to her surprise it was negative. According to her diary entries, Annie was plagued by all of life's problems at that time, haunted by memories of being unwanted by anyone in the world. Naturally, this was a heavy burden. Annie carried this burden with her all the time, believing she was pregnant and dreaming of becoming a mother despite her young age. The failed test frightened her greatly because she had already prepared for the baby's arrival. Still, running away in this situation seemed like a very strange decision that her parents didn't understand. Both tried to give Annie everything, especially care and love. She seemed comfortable in her family and enjoyed looking after her brothers, so this decision seemed unpredictable and spontaneous. Annie hadn't even tried to discuss her potentially delicate situation and future plans without asking Veronica and James. Naturally, they were concerned about their daughter's escape. Her phone was silent, so they went straight to the police. What worried them most was the question of who exactly Annie might have run away with. No one had heard of Annie having a serious relationship with a boyfriend, as she seemed too young for that. Parents and police officers contacted her close friends while still trying to reach her by phone, but she ignored all attempts. From acquaintances of the missing girl, they learned that her boyfriend's name was Darwin Christopher Bagshaw, and most people just called him Chris. The lovers met in a math class at school and were drawn to each other, beginning a romantic relationship. It turned out that this secret relationship had lasted 1.5 years before it became public. It was surprising that her parents didn't know about Annie's affection, as she had skillfully hidden her love from them. The missing girl's best friend revealed how obsessed Annie was with her boyfriend, and how afraid she was of losing him. During her relationship with her boyfriend, the company the teenagers kept changed, and Veronica and James didn't know most of the young people who were acquainted with their daughter. Despite these difficulties, the mother managed to contact Chris. It was suspected that he had run away with Annie. To everyone's surprise, the young man admitted that he had no idea where she was. He told a completely different story and confessed that their relationship had ended and that Annie had run away with a new boyfriend named LJ at the time of her disappearance. Indeed, the foster parents knew about Annie's friendship with Chris, but they had no idea that the teenagers were in a relationship. LJ's name was completely unfamiliar to them. They had never heard of him. While Veronica called her daughter's friends and acquaintances, trying to find out who the new boyfriend was and what was going on, James managed to track the girl's phone signal. Using an app, he monitored the device and its movements in real time on a map. For some time, the missing girl's phone was moving quite quickly, suggesting she was not traveling by car. But after a while, it stopped, and then the signal disappeared entirely. It was still impossible to reach their daughter, but while she had previously ignored all attempts, the parents were now being redirected to voicemail. The signal dropped near a Walmart located close to the riverbank, just a few miles from their home. The parents immediately went to the store and searched the supermarket, asking everyone if they had seen Annie. They showed people her pictures, but no one recognized the missing girl. No one had seen her in Walmart, and when they reviewed the surveillance videos, they couldn't find her either. It was strange. At home, Veronica kept calling her daughter, but the student continued to ignore every attempt to contact her. Naturally, the parents were in a panic, but they desperately hoped that Annie was okay. Of course, the couple was worried about the delicate situation Annie was in and the fact that she had run away, but they hoped until the last moment that their daughter would come to her senses and return home. During the search for the missing girl, a man came to the police station on March 11th, the day after her disappearance. A passerby had found blood on the riverbank. At first, the man thought the stains were from an injured wild animal. A little further away, he found another pool of blood with a red shoe nearby. The observant bystander found this suspicious and immediately decided to call the police. Forensic experts arrived at the scene and initially took blood samples for analysis. The forensic team confirmed that the samples belonged to a person. Given that Annie's last known location matched this place, the investigators were skeptical. After this news, a search operation was launched immediately. Divers were brought in to examine the river, several people searched the coast, and a rescue helicopter was deployed. About 2 kilometers north of where the shoe was found, the body of a girl in a red dress was discovered floating face down in the water. When the searchers pulled her from the water, they couldn't identify her immediately. Her head, and especially her face, was so severely disfigured that identification without forensic examination was impossible. Most of the bones in her face were shattered, and her nose was almost entirely missing. Experts determined that the cause of death was multiple blows to the head with a blunt object. She died on the night she disappeared. It was immediately clear that the girl had met a violent death. After the body was found, the police announced through the media that they had discovered the body of an Asian girl with dark hair, early 20s. When Veronica and James saw this report on TV, they immediately recognized it was their daughter. They knew the description didn't match Annie, but James recognized the red shoes he had given his daughter shortly before her disappearance. Veronica, on the other hand, knew that the deceased girl had a red dress matching the description, which could not be found in the house. Naturally, the family hoped it was just a coincidence and that the police had found another victim, but they had a bad feeling. It took some time for the body to be identified, and it was found that the victim had braces and had had her gallbladder removed. All of this matched Annie Kasprzak exactly. Using dental records and DNA analysis, experts finally confirmed that the missing 15-year-old student was indeed lying before them. The parents' hopes for Annie's safe return were thus shattered. The investigators then arrived at the home of the murdered girl's family and searched the victim's room, looking for clues that might point to the perpetrator. There, the police found precisely this diary. In it, the victim wrote about her relationship with Chris, which had ended and then resumed. On her 15th birthday, she wrote that she wanted a baby. The student desperately wanted to be a young mother to give her baby what had been denied to her throughout her own childhood. On March 1st, 2012, she wrote that she was finally pregnant with Chris's child. Annie later regretted that the pregnancy test came back negative, which she attributed to having taken contraceptives. An autopsy confirmed that the heroine of the story was never pregnant. Later diary entries confirmed that she had been mistaken and only wanted to believe in her dream. This way, she hoped to keep her boyfriend by her side. Annie was determined to build a real family with him. Veronica and James told the police officers about their conversation with Chris. Earlier, the teenager had reported that Annie had run away with her new boyfriend named LJ, but they had never been able to find the boyfriend or anyone who knew of his existence. On March 14th, the investigators met with 14-year-old Chris. While he was communicating with the police, his father Spencer was present the entire time. The young man knew about the rumors of Annie's pregnancy, but claimed that he couldn't be the father of the child. According to him, the student had been impregnated by LJ, who was 17 years old at the time. Chris didn't know him personally, but described the man based on rumors. He was allegedly referred to as a bad guy and was notorious, but the student couldn't provide any more information to the police. Naturally, Chris was asked where he was at the time of Annie's disappearance. The boy had an alibi and claimed he was at his grandmother Wilma's house. He had gone to his friend's house once that evening, but had not found him at home, so he quickly returned. The friend's grandmother confirmed his statement. Additionally, the teenager agreed to DNA tests and handed over the clothes and shoes he wore on the night of the murder. When Chris handed over his sneakers to the police, he said there might be some of Annie's blood on the soles because she had a nosebleed during one of their last meetings, which got on his shoes. The father was present and confirmed his son's statements. Thus, the former boyfriend of the deceased had a confirmed alibi and was not a suspect. His father, Spencer, was asked to find out details about his son's relationship with the victim, since the investigators were primarily interested in LJ, but the man had never heard of him. The only thing he remembered was a message he had received on social networks in November. It was sent from Annie's account, but signed with LJ's name. It looked strange, so Spencer dismissed it as a mistake. Later, Chris's father recalled that there were indeed nasty rumors about the mysterious boyfriend of the girl, suggesting he was in a gang or might even have killed a man. On March 15th, Chris's father contacted the police again, saying that the mysterious LJ had come to his son and threatened to kill him. Chris told him about it when his father returned from work, so he immediately decided to report it to the police. The riddle of the new boyfriend's identity could be solved by Annie's diary. One of the entries contained a poem by a certain Leon Ginton, perhaps the same LJ. However, Leon's connection to Annie was not confirmed, and the mysterious villain could not be found. The police then held a press conference where they informed the public about the information they had at that time. The authorities urged anyone familiar with the situation to provide useful information that could help catch the perpetrator. But this didn't advance the investigation until a witness named Joanna Franklin came forward. She had been arrested for fraud and claimed to know LJ. The girl gave a rough initial description of him. A young man, 19 years old, of Hispanic descent, and of small stature. Joanna claimed she knew more details about the crime, but was only willing to divulge them if the police dropped the charges against her. As the police officers had no other choice, they agreed to these terms. She testified that Annie had come to Daniel Ferry's house with LJ on the night of the murder. Daniel had an extensive criminal background and was selling illegal substances at that time. Joanna was also present that evening. She saw LJ and his girlfriend go to the bathroom where they had sex. After that, the couple returned to the others. Daniel then approached her and offered to have sex with him now. The girl thought it was a joke, laughed, and declined. Daniel then grabbed her by the head and slammed her so hard against the wall that blood splattered on the wallpaper. She fell to the carpet, blood flowing from her shattered nose, mouth, and ears. Daniel didn't stop there but kicked her several times in the torso, threatening her that he wasn't joking. The girl lay unconscious. Joanna went to the beaten girl and checked her pulse. According to the witness, the victim of the assault was still alive at this point, but the witness did nothing. She was just too scared to intervene. Joanna saw Ani still unconscious on the floor. Her face was very pale, but the victim was still breathing. The other teenagers at the party thought she was dead and showed no interest. LJ returned to the room and saw the bloody scene. Daniel explained to him that he had taught Ani a lesson for making fun of him. LJ reacted calmly to his friend's actions, and they began discussing what to do with the girl's body. Joanna watched as the victim was wrapped in a large towel, loaded into a car, and driven away. A few hours later, the teenagers returned without Ani. When asked, the boys said they had decided to go swimming near the canyon and that the girl had regained consciousness on the way there, but started an argument and ran away by the river. Joanna and the others present realized this was a lie and that the two boys had simply disposed of the body. The police asked Joanna what the victim had been wearing. The girl replied that she wore a lot of red, at least shoes and a dress, which matched the description of how she was found. The investigators decided to verify her statement and went to the dealer Daniel Ferry's house. He denied any involvement in the crime, denied harassing or hitting Ani. The investigators obtained a search warrant for the house, as the injuries would have inevitably left blood on the walls and carpet in the room. The wall Joanna mentioned was freshly painted, the carpet was missing, and the house generally appeared to have undergone a spontaneous renovation, which the police found suspicious. Upon closer inspection, the forensic technicians found spots on the floor that looked like stains. The more the forensic technicians examined the house, the more convinced they were that Joanna was telling the truth. It was decided to arrest Daniel and bring him in for questioning. The witnesses' statements were confirmed. He was indeed a gang member with a long criminal history, dealing with drugs. During the interrogation, the suspect was accompanied by his lawyer. He denied knowing LJ and Ani. Even when shown a photo of the girl, Daniel claimed not to know her name and insisted he didn't kill the student. Although he was indeed a gang member who consumed and sold drugs, despite the convincing words of the young criminal, the investigators still suspected his involvement in Ani's massacre. Soon, the analysis of the suspicious stains from the detainee's apartment came back from the lab. Surprisingly, it turned out not to be blood. It was gravy. The suspicion remained, but nothing could be proven against the young man, so he had to be released. While trying to prove his involvement in the girl's murder, the investigators found out that the main suspect had committed another crime at the same time. It was suspected that Daniel was involved in a robbery and kidnapping that had occurred in a neighboring town. This only increased the authorities' suspicions. It was decided to check the geolocation data of his cell phone. As it turned out, Daniel was in another town on March 10th when Ani was murdered. After months of searching for clues, the investigators couldn't connect the main suspect to the crime, so the young man was removed from the list of suspects. Eventually, he confessed to having kidnapped and beaten another man, which he and his friend did around the same time they allegedly killed the schoolgirl. They couldn't have been in two places at once, and thus had nothing to do with Annie's murder. The police turned to Joanna again. The girl confessed that she had made up the story. She wanted to get back at the young man because she knew he had kidnapped another man that night. That's why Joanna reported the man to the police to ensure he wouldn't escape justice. Due to this lie, the police spent more than a year on an investigation that was doomed to fail. In the following months, there was no progress in the case. No LJ could be found. Then the officer in charge of the investigation was killed in the line of duty, and the case was handed over to a new officer. With the death of the officer, a large amount of information was also lost, causing the investigation to come to a standstill. This caused great concern for Annie's family. It was decided to offer a reward for information leading to the capture of the murderer. The new investigator began reviewing all the case files again. He reread Annie's diary and focused on the fact that the deceased had intimate contact with Chris a few months before her death. Afterward, she thought she was pregnant, but this turned out to be a mistake. The girl apparently tried to bind the man to her with a child, which was already a strong motive for the crime. On the night of the murder, they repeatedly called each other, and in the evening, Annie received 3 calls from a hidden number. These could be traced back by the phone companies, allowing the investigators to find out they were made from Chris's number. It seemed that the couple had had an argument and were trying to solve their problems over the phone. The officers decided to recheck Chris's alibi, who seemed the most suspicious in this case. He was also the only one with a motive. By tracing the phone calls, they found out that the young man's grandmother and father had lied. Chris wasn't with them that night, and they did this only to confirm the young man's alibi and protect him. Moreover, much more blood was found on the shoes of the friend of the murdered girl than could be explained by a nosebleed. All this increased the suspicion against the boyfriend, who was clearly being protected by his relatives. After another conversation with the father, he admitted under pressure from the investigators that he had lied to the police 2 years earlier. A review of the conversations between Chris and his father revealed that the boyfriend had sent him messages instructing him to lie to the police about the nosebleed and his alibi. The biggest surprise for the new investigator was Chris's nickname. One of the young man's friends admitted that they always called their friend LJ. The final proof of his guilt came from checking the geolocation of his cell phone at the time of the girl's murder. It turned out that he was at the riverbank where the body was later found. It seemed the case was finally solved. At that time, Chris was living with his mother in Colorado, and police officers went to talk to him. When the investigators picked up the teenager for another conversation, he was on his way to school. The main suspect didn't expect to meet with the police, but wasn't confused and said he wouldn't talk to the investigators without a lawyer. In October 2014, he was extradited back to Utah. The young man refused to communicate with the police officers, but the evidence against him was sufficient to charge him. His trial was set for March 2016, and under state law, he was to be tried as a juvenile, meaning he could be released at 21. This couldn't be allowed to happen, so the prosecution, with the support of the murdered girl's family, petitioned for him to be tried as an adult due to the severity of the crime. Meanwhile, the teenage murderer was detained until the trial. During this time, Chris told a fellow inmate the story of the murder, revealing the horrific details of the crime. According to his confession, he truly believed for a long time that his girlfriend was pregnant and didn't know that this wasn't true. The very fact that she was pregnant shook him deeply. He didn't want to become a father so early, even before finishing school. The man planned to get rid of his girlfriend and suggested meeting by the river to discuss running away from home, a lie that the heroine of the story naively believed, writing a farewell letter to her family. When the student arrived at the meeting in a beautiful dress, Chris attacked her and hit her several times with a shovel in the face. The girl fell to the ground, and Chris struck her several more times with the edge of the shovel in her face. He then placed the shovel flat on her head and jumped on it until Annie showed no signs of life. Experts confirmed that the described process matched the victim's injuries. After Chris's confession, a petition was granted allowing the murderer to be tried as an adult due to the extreme brutality of the crime. He was charged with first-degree murder. The lawyer tried to convince the jury that the young man didn't know what he was doing and felt remorse. However, the deceased's family was sure that Chris was only trying to gain sympathy to receive a lighter sentence. Despite all the tricks of the juvenile offender, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in no less than 15 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2034. The murderer's father and grandmother were also charged with perjury and obstruction of justice, each receiving 2 years in prison. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.